everyone, welcome to another episode of Psych Talk. Today, I will talk about attachment theory. And so, whether you're wondering why you seek reassurance, avoid emotional closeness, or find it easy to trust, attachment theory offers fascinating insights into the way we bond with others. So, we'll look at how these attachment styles develop in childhood, how they show up in adult relationships, and the research that brought this theory to life. So, let's get into it. Attachment theory begins with the work of British psychologist John Bowlby, who believed that early relationships with caregivers shaped the way we relate to others throughout our lives. And so, Bowlby argued that every child has a natural need to form a bond with their caregiver. And this bond is not just emotional, it's evolutionary, which means that a secure attachment gives children the best chance of survival by ensuring their caregiver will protect and nurture them. But how do we know this? Well, Mary Ainsworth, who was Bowlby's collaborator, designed an experiment called the Strange Situation Study. In simple words, in this study, a child was briefly separated from their mother or the primary caregiver, and researchers observed how the child reacted when the primary caregiver returned. And so the child was left alone in this room with, some toys. And then the researchers will look at how the child will behave during the absence of the primary caregiver and how the child will react when the caregiver was put back into the room with the child. They also looked at how the child behaved when the mother or the primary caregiver was in the room with the child when the experiment first started. And so, based on these reactions, Ainsworth identified 4 different attachment styles. We have secure attachment, avoidant attachment, anxious ambivalent attachment, and disorganized attachment. So, what is secure attachment? So, in secure attachment, the child feels safe to explore when the caregiver leaves the room because they know that the caregiver will return. So, they have this reassurance that the caregiver is not abandoning them, but he or she will return. And so, they feel safe to explore, they feel safe to keep playing with the toys. And of course, they will experience a little bit of distress when the caregiver leaves, but they're able to self-soothe and they're able to emotionally regulate themselves. And it means that basically the parent, obviously they did a great job because they were meeting the child's needs and they were always responsive and consistent in meeting these needs, right? And also it's very important to know that the parent is able to or always comforts the child when they are feeling distressed. And probably the parent also encourages exploration while also providing a safe base and also shows warmth, affection, and reliability. And if the primary caregiver shows all those elements, then the child is able to develop trust in the caregiver. The child feels safe to explore the world and also learns to regulate emotions effectively. So an example could be, let's say, you notice that your child is crying, right? Well, the parent picks the child up, try to soothe them with gentle words and touch, and later they encourage the child to explore a toy, and obviously the parent stays nearby for assurance. And so this is basically how secure attachment is created. Make sure to meet all your child needs, make sure to give reassurance when you're about to leave or when you're leaving the child alone, and make sure to make the child feel that the world is a safe environment. Okay, the second attachment style, it's called avoidant attachment. So the child avoids closeness, acting indifferent when the caregiver leaves or returns. And so what Ainsworth noticed in these rooms is that when the caregiver was in the room with the child didn't even try to interact with the caregiver. He or she didn't really care. When the caregiver left, the child didn't care either. And when the caregiver returned, the child also did not care. And so, literally, we can see this indifference about the caregiver. And so, what are probably the parents' behavior that encouraged, quote unquote, this avoidant attachment? Well, probably emotionally distant or unavailable, minimizes the child's emotional needs or encourages independence prematurely, and often dismiss of the child's distress. And so, what does the child do? The child learns to suppress emotions over rejection, becomes overly independent, avoiding close relationships, and may appear self-reliant but struggles internally with vulnerability. An example could be, let's say, a child falls and cries for comfort, but the parent responds with, "You're fine, stop crying," and does not provide physical comfort. So the child learns not to express their needs. Okay, the third attachment is anxious attachment. So these individuals crave closeness, but they fear abandonment. And so the child is clingy and anxious, unsure if their needs will be met. And so, what Answorth saw basically when the mother returned, they were not able to be soothed. So, even though the child was happy to see that the mother returned to the room, they were not able to calm down. Like, they will be extremely distressed. And also, what she noticed is that basically they were extremely distressed also when the primary caregiver left the room. And while they were alone in the room, the child was not able to explore, was not able to play. They were constantly just crying and feel, they were just overwhelmed and distressed. Obviously, this anxious ambivalent attachment is called insecure attachment. And the parent's behavior must have been inconsistent in responding to the child's needs. So sometimes the parent might have been there for the child, but sometimes he might have or she might have been not there. So it's very inconsistent. So the child cannot trust the caregiver to be responsive to their needs because he or she doesn't know whether the caregiver is going to be there for him or her. And so maybe the parent sometimes is also overly involved and other times neglectful. And so again, this creates uncertainty in the child about whether their needs will be met. And so the child becomes clingy and overly dependent, fears abandonment, and struggles with emotional regulation, and also demonstrates heightened anxiety in relationships. An example of these could be a parent sometimes comforts their child when they're crying, but ignores them at other times, depending on their mood or stress levels. And the child becomes unsure whether they can rely on the caregiver. Okay, last but not least, we have disorganized attachment. So the child shows erratic behavior, often linked to fear or trauma in caregiving. So what does it mean? That the parent might have been erratic, frightening, or abusive. The parent may be a source of both comfort and fear. Maybe due to unresolved trauma or mental health issues. And obviously, this creates confusion for the child about how to seek safety. And so the child experiences fear and anxiety around the caregiver, struggles with trust and emotional regulation, and may develop chaotic or disoriented behaviors in relationships. An example of this could be a parent yells at a child one moment, then tries to hug them the next. So the child feels conflicted and doesn't know how to, respond or trust the parent. Okay, so now let's put this into context with some examples. Imagine a securely attached child at the playground. They explore the jungle gym, but occasionally look back to make sure their caregiver is watching. That's secure attachment in action. Now, picture an avoidant child. They might keep playing without showing any concern when the caregiver leaves, not because they don't care, but because they have learned not to rely on others. So now, let's fast forward to adulthood, because obviously these attachments, they don't just disappear, and they often show up in our romantic, and platonic relationships. And so let's revisit those 4 attachment styles to see how they manifest now. Secure attachment. So these individuals are comfortable with intimacy and trust their partner. They communicate openly and handle conflicts with patience. So an example could be someone who feels confident expressing their needs and listening to their partners without fear of rejection. Then we have avoidant attachment. So avoidant individuals tend to value independence and struggle with emotional closeness. So how can this look like? Maybe a partner who shuts down or distances themselves during emotional conversations. Anxious attachment. So these individuals crave closeness, but they fear abandonment. So they may seek constant reassurance. An example could be someone who texts their partner repeatedly, worrying if they don't respond quickly. And disorganized attachment. So disorganized individuals often fear closeness and rejection simultaneously. So their behavior can be unpredictable. So an example could be a partner who oscillates between clinginess and pushing their partner away. And interestingly enough, you can have a secure attachment with one caregiver and an insecure attachment with another caregiver. So it can be, confusing for a child, but definitely secure attachment can be a buffer for, oh my God, many mental health disorders or, a lot of things. And so if your caregivers consistently met your needs and provided comfort, you likely developed a sense of safety that carries into your relationships today. So you have a secure attachment. If your caregivers were emotionally distant or unresponsive, you might have learned to suppress your needs and rely only on yourself. And so you have avoidant attachment. If your caregivers were inconsistent, so sometimes present, sometimes not, you might have become hyper-focused on ensuring others stay close. And so you have anxious attachment. And if your caregivers were a source of fear or trauma, you may struggle to trust others while longing for connection. And so you have disorganized attachment. But here's the good news. Attachment styles are not permanent. And with self-awareness, therapy, and healthy relationships, you can move toward a more secure attachment style. And so therapies like emotionally focused therapy, EFT, are designed to help individuals and couples recognize and change attachment patterns. Then obviously we have self-awareness. So understanding your own attachment style is the first step toward change. And also being in a supportive, secure partnership can help you develop trust and healthier patterns. So let me give you a reflection exercise. Think about how your caregivers responded to your emotional needs as a child. How does that influence how you react to closeness or conflict now? And also, simply ask your parents. Call your parents if you can and ask them, when I was a child, how did I react when you left me at preschool? Or when you left me alone in the room? How did I react when you came back to pick me up from school, preschool? Or how did I react when you came back into the room? So hopefully your parents will remember, so it's going to be easier for you to understand your attachment style. But it's easy to identify your attachment style based on your interpersonal relationships that you have right now as an adult. And so let me know in the comments your attachment style. And that is it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Spotify, and follow us on Instagram. We're called Psych Talk Pod. Thank you for listening.